Hey there, it's Anonymous Tea, where we spill the tea anonymously. Hello, everyone. Hello, YouTubers. Hope you guys are all having an amazing day today, sending good vibes, sending positivity, sending blessings, and good energy to each and every single one of you. Thank you so much for tuning in. So, anything I say is alleged and in my very, very personal opinion. This is for entertainment purposes only. None of this is personal. The Copyright Act of 1976 is in the description box. Some meat and potatoes, some housekeeping items. It is free to follow me. Free to follow me on this channel, Anonymous Tea. Free to follow me on my other channel, Anonymous Tea Podcast. There is new content over there. Follow me on the Tickety Talk at Anonymous Tea Podcast. Free to follow me on the Instagram. On the Instagram, he's at AnonymousRealityTV. Free to share everywhere. Free to like the video so it gets out to the algorithm. Free to share with your family, your friends, and your foes, and coming or going, hit the like button. So today we are talking Eddie Murphy's new documentary called Being Eddie, you guys. And I watched it on Netflix. I want to give you a review, whether you should see it, whether you should skip it, all of the things. Listen, if you are an Eddie Murphy fan, this is going to be for you. You're going to enjoy it. You're going to enjoy the trip down memory lane. You're going to enjoy some information, some facts you may not have known about. However, if you are looking for mess and scandal and any of the alleged rumors about Eddie Murphy, you are not going to find it in this documentary, because it is as cookie cutter is going to get, you guys. So if you are looking for, that rumor about that situation in the early 90s, not going to happen. If you were looking for Johnny Gill, not in this documentary. If you were looking for Eddie Murphy to talk about his personal life, with the exception of him mentioning Paige and Paige being featured in this documentary, no. Although, there is something to tap into, because when he was talking about, a time when he was down, and he kept mentioning his divorce. Well, there's been only one other person that you've been married to. There's only one person you've been divorced from, right? And that is Nicole Murphy. So I was trying to figure out, okay, what are we trying to pick at here, right? Now, some things I love. Let's talk about Eddie Murphy's house, you guys. House is laid out. There is a bowling alley. Your girl loves bowling. I'm here for all of it. There is this game room. Jamie Foxx was cracking jokes talking about how can you have a game room and there is nothing that is broken. It is immaculate. Everything works. Pac-Man, like any game you can think of. I think he's got a music room too, full of guitars and everything else, because he likes to party all the time. Which is ironic in itself, because actually that's anything but the truth. But none of the less, the home is laid out. The home is laid out. Anything you could think of, this home has it. And then, y'all, he has a remote control roof. At any point in time, he could just hit that remote control to open the roof or close the roof. So a lot of the documentary, the roof was open. And then at some point, Eddie Murphy was like, well, let me just close this bad boy. And out comes this remote. And the roof starts closing. Like, that's just giving, you got too much money at that point. You got too much money if you are just closing the roof like that. But some things that I found interesting about Eddie Murphy's life, I did not know that his father was unalived. Didn't know that. And he also spoke a lot about his stepdad, and also had another brother. Spoke amazingly about Charlie Murphy. I felt like a good portion of the documentary, they were utilizing Charlie Murphy describing Eddie Murphy. And I think this is where some people may have an issue. If you were expecting Eddie Murphy to really go in and give you the tea and explain a lot about his life, not so much. It was more so allowing everybody else to tell it for you. And then every now and then he would come in and give little tidbits about stuff. or reference pictures or reference different articles or something specific. But for the most part, everybody was speaking for him, right? So a lot of it, some of it was Charlie Murphy, which the Charlie Murphy stuff I didn't mind. There was a lot of good Charlie Murphy content in the actual documentary. However, there was a lot of time on Jerry Seinfeld and a lot of time on Pete Wicks. Not so much time on Michael Shea or Kenan Thompson. They just had like a little if you blinked and missed it kind of thing. Probably who got the most out of his Eddie Murphy's comedy friends, I would say the most screen time probably was Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock and Jamie Foxx, and then a little bit of Kevin Hart is how I would kind of like rank it. I would feel like Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock had the most to say with Jamie Foxx. Because then it was like, because at some point I was like, we're not getting that much Eddie Murphy. There was a lot of time spent on the 80s because the 80s is when Eddie Murphy soared into superstardom and everything else. Eddie Murphy really wanted to make it known that he was really the first to kind of pioneer, you know, being able to do multiple things, being able to do the comedy and acting, and also set the tone for, he's taking the ownership and the credit of Black actors, Black movie stars being able to gross, hundreds and millions of dollars at the box office and get paid. And because he had referenced how, after that, Denzel blew up, Morgan Freeman blew up, and all these other people that blew up. He also, provided a lot of opportunities in his projects for the other comedians. So that was nice to see. He idolized Richard Pryor, talked about all of his movies, talked about Harlem Nights, talked about Beverly Hills Cop, talked about Trading Places, talked about all that stuff, and how originally the role was supposed to go to Richard Pryor, but Richard Pryor was having a situation with allegedly the Coca-Cola and blew up, and nonetheless, so they had to switch gears and change things. And I didn't realize how young Eddie Murphy was, that he already had a motion picture movie deal with Paramount. And he was completely green to it all. And Eddie Murphy has lived a long life because he was talking about all of the quote-unquote old Hollywood that had been around, 50, 60 years in this industry. And some might have been, not a fan of Eddie Murphy, you get where I'm getting, right? But they wanted to meet Eddie Murphy, but refer to him as the N-word and everything else, because they were fascinated about him. Eddie Murphy was polarizing to them. There was something about him and his talent that was magnetizing. They wanted more. Eddie Murphy spoke a lot about his relationship with Rick James. That seemed to be of his Hollywood, friendships and everything else. It seems to be very significant to him. So much so that he has somebody who worked with Rick James as well, even though I believe she was discovered by George Clinton. Val Young is her name. And she seems to be a part of Eddie Murphy's inner circle. Eddie Murphy made a comment about the fact, and I don't know, some people might take it wrong, but I kind of understand what he was saying. Everybody kind of, puts Eddie Murphy, Prince, Whitney Houston, and Michael Jackson in that, 80s explosion of just, super duper stardom, right? However, he made a comment that, the difference between me and them is I have self-love. And I think what he meant to say was he did not succumb to whatever demons or pressures or whatever else of Hollywood that ultimately impacted Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, and Prince. However, I still feel that wasn't fair, because I feel like even though Eddie Murphy kind of dipped his toe into the music industry, I don't think he fully was in the music industry to the extent of Prince, Michael Jackson, and Whitney Houston, of how dark things can get, how they could try to blackball you, how they try to exploit you, how they try to, have a scandal against you or mess with your music or mess with different things. Eddie Murphy never experienced that type of level of sabotage, of somebody like really trying to do everything they can to try to destroy you. There's been little scandals and / rumors, but nothing to the extent of what's happened with Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, and Prince. But I understand what he's saying in terms of the fact that he's been able to, still be out here on this earth because he doesn't drink, he doesn't do any drugs or anything like that. And he made it a point to say that, Rick James, even though obviously people know Rick James likes to, have a good time, all of these things, but he said Rick James didn't do that stuff in front of him. And anytime Eddie Murphy was at any of these parties or any of these events, he would always know when the time was to leave, because there's always like a main party where all the celebrities are at. And then there's like an after party where if you want to indulge and engage in some other type of, substances or lifestyles or whatever else of the persuasion, that's after the main party. And Eddie Murphy made it a point to say that, Rick James, he said, usually your friends, like if people know that you're not into drinking or doing drugs, they're not going to do that stuff in front of you because they know you're not going to feel pressure to do it. And Eddie Murphy talked about the first time when, it was presented to him for him to try Coca-Cola. And he said, absolutely not. Like, he's not into it. Right? He also talked about how he pulled his brother. His brother was in the service and, hired him to be his security. And it was a nice story about how he talked about, protecting Eddie Murphy and beating people up if they wanted to mess with Eddie Murphy and all of this and all of that. Like, there were so many good moments, and I miss Charlie Murphy. And they referenced, you guys, the Chappelle Show. They referenced the Chappelle Show, and it was so funny as far as like the Rick James story and everything else. And then also they talked about, Eddie Murphy on Saturday Night Live, and they did a parallel of like how he blew up on Saturday Night Live and how when he came in, that was after like Lorne Michaels left and, and then Lorne Michaels obviously came back or whatever else, but they were not happy with the cast. But Eddie Murphy still said at that point in time, he was still living with his mom. He really didn't, make it big yet. And he said he used to around that time because he, had that going on. He blew up as a movie star and then he was still doing comedy specials. And he said at the time, he was able to at first still go to different comedy, stores or comedy shops or whatever and work on new material. But then he said it got to a point where once Eddie Murphy blew up, people then would specifically just attend to then also critique him or try to, tear him down or bash his comedy. And he didn't like that. So, also Tracy Morgan was in there. How could I forget that? Tracy Morgan also was in the documentary too, but was not a lot of him, but he was in there. Went through Boomerang, how people criticize that, how basically all of the background characters were not black and the main characters of running an office, running, all of the main prominent characters, it was an all black cast. Also the same thing with Coming to America. And a funny story was he said that Jesse Jackson thought that the men in the barbershop, we're all going to have amazing careers and we're all going to do amazing things. And Eddie Murphy was like, I played all those characters. That was me. I was the 80-year-old Jew. I played all the characters. And then Jesse Jackson said he's going to go back and watch the movie. I cannot, you guys. I cannot. Oh, and then Eddie Eddie Murphy talked about how people dragged him for Vampire in Brooklyn, but he said that was mainly the reason as to why he got, he was on a ban from Saturday Night Live, because he felt like you don't do that to your peers. Like, nobody's going to do that to like Will Ferrell or Adam Sandler and like bash if like one of his movies underperforms. And so ultimately he eventually obviously came back, and it was funny, it worked out really well and everything else, but he said that was the reason that he was mad. He said he wasn't mad at David Spade per se, he was more so mad that all of the powers that be, all of the executives, all the higher ups allowed that joke to go by, considering Eddie Murphy was an alum, and that really pissed him off. They also talked about him doing the different characters for the Nutty Professor and how many hours he had to spend in makeup and everything else, and how he had to like change his voice. And it seems that he's very like sensitive about his laugh and people making fun of his laugh, that he like changes his laugh on the spot. They talked about when he came back to host SNL with Lizzo, and Kenan Thompson said that, he was laughing, and then Lizzo was making him laugh, and then he also changed his laugh. And I was like, what? Like, just changed his laugh so that you can't copy him. You can't copy what he says and what he does. Also talked a lot about, how he took a break from movies and everything else, and, just wanted to live his life and everything. Talked about him being robbed of the Oscar for Dreamgirls. Eddie Murphy seems to think that it has to do with when he had hosted back in the 80s, and he made some comment about, black people not receiving Oscars and all this and that. That's not the reason. You were sabotaged, right? Because I remember those hit pieces that people were mad that Norbit was coming out and you were not doing all this campaigning and begging for them to give you the Oscar. And he said that he was not upset that he lost the Oscar, but he was upset that he got up and dressed up for these awards and only to sit there and lose. And I believe he was with Tracy Edmonds at the time. But nonetheless, this all of it is crazy. Didn't talk about, the child that he has with Spice Girl, like just nothing, but did talk about how his children is everything to him. Talked about how he has 10 kids. His kids ride so hard in the paint for Eddie Murphy. They really show up. It really seems like one band, one sound as it pertains to Eddie Murphy. And I feel that that's important. Like, they really love their dad, you could tell, and they really look up to him and look up, for his wisdom and his opinions on things and all of that. So that is beautiful to see, right? That is absolutely wonderful to see. I'm trying to think if there was anything else, really. Oh! Probably one of the funniest things, right? Because they were teasing back and forth whether or not Eddie Murphy would do stand-up again. And he basically left the door open. Said that didn't say flat out that he would never do it again, but said that if he did do it, that he's got years and decades of material that he can do, because he's always writing, he's always creating, he's always thinking of stuff. However, he did say at the beginning that he would, be like, have like a ventriloquist thing, like have like little puppets. One puppet would be of Richard Pryor, one would be of Bill Cosby. And they would have like a conversation. And so somebody made it for him at some point by the end of the documentary, you guys. And then he had one apparently upstairs of Paul Mooney, and there was one like it was crazy. And he had one already too of the lady that worked with Rick James. Why can't I think of her name right now? Val Young. He had one of her too, a puppet of her too. And so he is mimicking and doing impressions of Bill Cosby and Richard Pryor and asking, would you like some Jell-O pudding pop? And why did you put the pill in the chocolate? That whole bit was funny. And I would, oh my goodness, if he goes back to stand up and just does a bit of Richard Pryor and Bill Cosby, I would think it would be so hilarious. He didn't speak too much about Michael Jackson. And when one of his daughters was on Claim to Fame, I love that show. I love Claim to Fame. But what I loved about that show is they gave you insight to the relationships that they have with the famous relative that they're related to. And so one of his daughters was on there, and she talked a lot about how often they would go to Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch when she was a kid. So it was a really close relationship and a close bond. And I thought we were going to get a little bit more out of that, but it seemed like the one person they focused on more so was Rick James. So I found that interesting because I felt like Eddie Murphy was like good friends with Michael Jackson too, and a lot of other celebrities too. He did make it a point to talk about that he buried a lot of his friends, like Red Fox, like James Brown. All these people he buried, paid for their funerals and everything else because there was issues with their money, or their money wasn't right, or there was issues with their estate, or the family couldn't afford the funerals and all of the things. And he said that he buried a lot of his friends, and so he's like, he doesn't like to fully grieve, but he says what'll happen is a memory about them will like pop up, and he'll, you know, remember that and have a chuckle or whatever else. And so that was interesting, right? But I feel like that was kind of the gist of the documentary. Is you get taken on a ride of Eddie Murphy's life. You get to live through, you know, his, you know, the heyday of the 80s and how he transitioned into, you know, playing multiple characters, telling stories, you know, that were geared towards a lot of stories telling Black stories of the Black experience and all of that. And then also how he transitioned, you know, once he became a father. Oh, also Tracy Ellis Ross was in there. See how it just happened? She was in there too. But then how it transitions into him doing kid-friendly movies, right? Like Shrek, like, you know, The Nutty Professor, Dr. Dolittle, and all of those things, and how he's been multifaceted in terms of, you know, he's been an action star, he's done rom-coms, he's done kids movies, he's done all types of things, right? So he's had a really long career. He said he's been at this for over, you know, 4 decades. So he's like, at this point, you know, he feels like he's done a lot. Now, his next movie is going to be the George Clinton biopic. And Eddie Murphy has a process of kind of how he likes to get into character and gets into things and prepare and all this. So that'll be interesting. But I still feel a way that he still does not have an Oscar. That's insanity. That is absolute insanity and blasphemy and an utter disgrace, you guys. But nonetheless, there's that. That's it. That's all. That's todos. That's final. That's finito. That's the end of the road. That's the end of the line for this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Please do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you're notified the moment I post content on my channel. And with that being said, I'll talk to you guys again very soon.